It should be like a photo too.
Testing. I'll just mute this. I think this guy needs to be muted as well.
So you sort of introduce the problem.
Done.
How do they actually solve it in practice? Well, no.
Thank you. All good? Yes. You are good to go. I'll just turn off the video.
Hey, good to go.
What's the?
Everyone just live streaming now as well. Just put it out. For those who aren't here.
How do I go up, down? It's not working. Oh.
Yeah, probably so like alt tab.
How can I get?
There you go.
Ah, sorry. Yeah. Ah,
Up and down, or would be okay.
there you go. That's a picture. Cool. Hi. My name's Raoul. This is not going to be a technical talk. So I did some stuff with ADSB a while ago. Talked to Pam. She said she should come down and show you guys. So I'm going to focus more on the aviation side of things. Well, give you guys an intro, because I'm sure you guys can figure out the technical details yourself. So yeah, I did do a little bit with radio way back when, doing some radio astronomy, early days, but not much since then. But a massive aviation geek. So it's kind of where I'm coming from this. So just as a very, very high level overview, when we're talking ADSB, there's three parts to this, right? You've got individual controllers in airports. You've got the pilots in the airplanes, obviously, and then you've got the Australian, the Melbourne and Brisbane control centers, right? So all our airspace is run by largely two control centers, and they use radar, ADSB, and so on to track civilian and military flights all through Australia. And the way they do this, or have done this for the last since the 50s is with what they call transponders, which is basically just squawk codes. It's in usually a 4-digit code. So this has evolved out of World War II, where they used to send, I think, fairly rudimentary signals to the early radars to kind of identify this friend or foe. Am I a British fighter returning back, or am I a German fighter coming through? So they had a signal way of saying. And that kind of improved. And now we're actually sending, we've kind of, well, that's kind of evolved to send data. So we're actively sending, and we can also receive data through that kind of same thing. So it's very much a legacy system that's evolved and been retrofitted. And now we're at the point where, for safety reasons, it's mandated pretty much everywhere in Australia that we do this. And we're one of the first countries to push this out to that extent. And the reason is we have this massive space that we're trying to cover, and traditional voice just doesn't cut it for those kind of remote areas. So it's really hard to understand people, and even with HF, you don't get full coverage. So this map on the right is the Atsb coverage that they've got to at about 10,000 feet. It gets bigger as you go higher. But this is really what they're trying to achieve, is kind of that constant communication between aircraft in all sorts of remote areas. You can see on the map on the left, we cover a massive area in the Pacific, including where flight MH, was it 17, kind of went down. So that's all being covered either out of Brisbane or the Melbourne Control Centre. Modern navigation now, it used to rely on radio navgates. Australia's pretty much switched to GPS only. So they supplement it with radio, but it's predominantly GPS. And this is a sample from Melbourne of the flight. Like it's this one on the left is an arrival procedure, and that one on the left is a departure. So they basically have GPS coordinates that they work off, and the controllers will issue, take this arrival and follow this path and go into the runway. The other side is, so these kind of systems are also used much more dynamically for collision avoidance. Right, so it's what's called TCAS, which is automated. So the planes will interrogate each other to see where they're at and give pilots instructions. So you get to the point where there's an order of priority that aircraft follow. TCAS takes highest priority. Right? So if a pilot get an audio warning saying TCAS alert, dive or climb, that's an immediate. So it overrides any air traffic control or anything else that's happening. Yeah, and so Atsb itself, which underpins all of this, you can look it up. There's a lot of info on it. It's very broad. But the stuff that's of interest is this data field 17. So data field 17 contains basically the position and identification information for aircraft, right? And it's about 56 bits transmitted over 2 frames. There's some wacky stuff, the way they do latitude and longitude. So this is probably an artifact of the 80s where they didn't have much data to play around with. So they sacrificed some precision for brevity. So it's a little bit interesting, a little bit weird the way it goes, but yeah, it covers that. There's a whole bunch of other ones coming in now, which are then used for more active interrogation. But predominantly when you see utilities like Dunk 1090, which you might have played around with, Atsb, that's what they're pulling out, that kind of data. And yeah, that's $20, right? $10 on the internet and hook it up. So this is what it looks like on an airplane. So again, this is old technology, but it's repurposed for the same kind of thing. So what they use for what's called distance distance measuring equipment and transponder all typically use the same antenna. So they're all backwards compatible, basically. There's a whole bunch of different communities out there. The one I've been using is Atsb Exchange. What these guys will do, they'll actually ship you free hardware if you're in an area that's not well covered. They've got instructions on shopping lists and how to make the antennas and so on. So they're really geared up for collecting masses of data. And that's really why I come into it, right? So less so about what I can pick up locally, but more what you can play with when all these people pull this data. And it's really cool because you can, once you upload your stream, you set up with the Raspberry Pi, put your antenna on the roof. They give you really good statistics, so you can look at your own signal, everybody else's, get access to data, and so on. So it's kind of cool to play with and really easy to do. So the stuff I've played around with, they give you historic data of about 120 days, so you can do all sorts of analytics and big data and statistical analysis.
Do they also provide the instructions to how to hook up to the system?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so as I said, you can request for some of these to get like a free setup, and they'll do that if you're in an area that doesn't have coverage, and I can show you that later on some of the printouts. But otherwise, it's a shopping list, so click here, click here, click here, and then download this utility, put it on a CF card, and off you go. Basically, there's very little to do. It's very, very easy, very straightforward. Yeah, and then this is what the data looks like. And so typically when I do kind of data analysis, just 2 days worth of data is about 100 gig. So I'm trying to move that to the cloud so I can scale up to weeks of data and go terabyte, but it's a lot of stuff to churn through. So there's a lot of data. These things transmit about every second or so, or more often. So there's a lot of you can think of all the aircraft in train at the moment. These guys do enrich it as well. So the stuff that's highlighted in red is the stuff that you actually receive. Yeah, all the other stuff is kind of enriched. So there's some consistent identification for each aircraft. So they're globally unique, they're static. And so that's what these guys do, is they figure out what aircraft it is and then look up public interfaces, what the flight plan is, where it's coming from, and so on. So play around with it a little bit. And yeah, that's then what I do with it. So it's putting all this together and then seeing kind of what this looks like and all the organic shapes around it, which is kind of my interest. So this is Melbourne. I've got a friend who's an air traffic controller, and she kind of said, "Oh yeah, that was a harsh day." And I think this is like a Tuesday, and you can see some things like as sorry, it was a weekend. You can see the holding patterns as planes coming from Sydney, which they now try to avoid. So again, they're using these kind of systems to coordinate and say, slow down, you've got a 5-minute gap until you can land and do all those kind of things. And down the bottom, you can also see a lot of just chaotic things. That's unique in Australia, as you can see on some of the other printouts I showed, because that's like aircraft traffic. Right? So the big Boeings and Airbuses will fly these straight lines between cities. But again, because Australia's introducing this as a safety measure, we've deployed this to light aircraft, which is a little bit unique. And a lot of other countries don't see any of that kind of.
So those flight patterns would be happening, say, in the US, but they're just not received, or they just want to be picked up because the aircraft don't have the ASB.
Yeah. So you'll see in a second. You can see the actual dots, and each one of those is a DF that's been transmitted. So it looks very, very different. It's kind of really fascinating because you can see things like in China, there's almost nothing. Right? So is that because they're not transmitting, or there's not many people picking this up? Right? Which is probably my suspicion. There's not many people collecting ADS-B traffic and shipping it on. I ran my thing for the top 50 airports by passenger movement. And it's interesting to contrast them, and Melbourne and these kind of airports, definitely masses of information there. whereas other ones, particularly in Europe, tend to be very specific, very direct. But then, yeah, you get some other ones where they do a lot of training out of, and it's masses of stuff everywhere. So from an artistic point of view, I kind of like things where, yeah, man has, we build things, right? We build things for a purpose, and so they tend to be kind of squares and rectangles and so on. But then over time, they change or take shortcuts through, through a field and then create these kind of organic patterns. And so that's kind of my take on all this kind of things. Finding, we've got man-made, go back to it, very precise kind of things, but then when you turn that into real life and when people take shortcuts because the controller says, oh, you can go straight to here now because we've got, thing, and then over time that creates these kind of really cool organic shapes. Yeah, you come up with all these kind of things. So when they print out large, and they're about 100 meg each or something. So this is yeah, so this is more your typical thing where I think this is actually Shanghai. But the other interesting thing here is in the pattern, you can also see that there's obviously buildings in the way. But so it's interesting to see the variation between the more organic things. It's all competitive control, right? These are all working on it's just 2 days. It's 2 days. 48 hours. That is yeah, so this will be like police helicopters or something. You see small airports where people do practice.
Yeah. You yourself? Yes. How's it working?
Yeah, that's the second image. So
Yeah,
this
you got
is
a video, did you?
so this is Sydney, that's so this is Melbourne, this is Melbourne. So again, you can see the more chaotic stuff. No, I don't have a room. But I've had it a few office friends. I've got a few office friends. Of course, yes, people are suggesting it, but it's kind of, yeah, because they usually pretty big. They don't work on it. But yeah, as I said, like I've got like this is one of the common holding patterns when you go into Sydney. So they come from Sydney and then to wait to go to the land. And they're actually saying, oh, this is a massive busy day, so they use this one to busy, so they rewrite coins every year. Yes, I'm just working at the moment to try to increase the day. So I generate about 50 of these in the run, and that takes most of the day to just churn through the gigabytes of data. So I've got to find it.
And you go to see.
It's all Python. So this is New Zealand. Auckland at the top. Various airports. So again, you can see as soon as it is the island. It just,
Yeah. You will see the shape.
yeah. So it's all a bit interesting. So it's really something for you guys to think about when you do these kind of yellow glass or Yeah, trying to visualize these kind of things, but maybe take the context away. So you don't really present information about what this is. It then just becomes an organic shape that may not be reason.
Is this something that any of us can generate with your scripts? Or is this something that any of us can generate with your scripts? Or do you have to public?
I've got an older version on my GitHub.
Yeah.
But I've got a bunch of links in here, so you can grab the. So if you go to this site, you can get all the historic data. As I said, I just wanted to get a script that basically lists the top 50 airports and stuff like that. You can look for some interesting things like look at all Qantas flights, so look at all the various airlines. Yeah, I was looking at color coding of some of the arrivals. There's
What about the difference between different days? Do they tend to look quite similar?
Oh yeah, no, they're very different. Very different. So weekends and so on. So there are differences.
A printout of someone's birthday or something, or a special day would be like an interesting present or something.
Yeah, maybe their hometown, right?
Yeah.
Maybe their, what happened with their hometown.
Yeah,
Maybe when they got married or something. But yeah, they keep only the last 120 days, so I'm going to be a little bit. I'm sure somebody's replicating.
I feel like NGV Expo.
Yeah. I mean, I started doing this whole thing because I'll back window faces the Melbourne flight path. So initially, I started writing scripts based off dongles and so on to just tell me what plane was landing. Because you see it's anything like the window. Where did that come from? Who is that? And so on. So, okay, it's a Qantas. It came from South Africa. It's kind of cool. And then you see what else is out there, and you just imagine a larger and larger scale. So, that's not interesting.
You know those websites like Chapter and stuff, or is that like amateurs who are?
They do the same thing. So they all work. As far as I can tell, they all work off the same kind of principle. There's about 3 or 4 main ones.
Fly away.
Yeah, those kind of things. They all do the same kind of thing. So you either join up because you've got your own stuff, or as I said, in some cases where they've got a gap, then they send out equipment and you can join up. Yeah, when I do these for China, there's hardly anything, even though the passenger need much, and it should look like that.
Yeah. Graphics library, if you did it by hand as well. Yeah.
Oh,
Amazing.
it's just,
It's 12 minutes long.
no, it was just, it's just funny with the data in a different way.
Thinking about less customers.
Feel free to keep those.
Big- bigger goal.
Maybe runs. Any other questions? Feel free to hit me up on Twitter on this kind of stuff. Like I said, particularly the aviation side, less so the technical side. Yeah.
Yeah, you're just commenting on the light aircraft, you know, a lot of probably would be this airport as well, that kind of thing, and the lighter aircraft using ADSB. So knowing that, and a lot of the talks around fleet management of drones, and of course it has to go drones, but using, you know, and managing multiple drones and where it might go to, do you see ADSB, that was one of the speculative ones that are going to potentially use to manage drones in large companies and that kind of thing? Would you see that as something they use to manage drones, or do you think it's a little bit far-fetched?
The big one, the CFX one,
I think
fly around has it, so I can see that in person.
Yeah, it depends. Like if you're talking large size, then yes. I think the problem is more one of intention. So a lot of times the difficulty in air traffic control, they're all about separating the aircraft. So it's more about knowing what that aircraft wants to do. And so with a drone, if you're just flying it, you're not communicating with anybody. They don't know what you're doing. So that's when they go into a thing where they shut down airports and so on, because are you intending to fly over this way or that way? They don't know. ADSB won't give you that so much.
Yeah, more on fleet management. So let's say you've got 200 drones that you're managing in a commercial capacity. And so they're all automated, they've all got automated routes, that kind of thing. And you want to integrate that into airspace. Do you see that as a viable way to manage them and track them on a large scale?
Then it becomes one about whether you can tie into the system. So from what I've been told officially is that the ADSB receivers that the civilian aviation authority does have, they're filtered. So all the military, all the police, and certain other categories of things don't show up. So unless you have your own network of receivers, you're probably not going to get a real-time view. It'd be, I don't know, a few hours delayed, so whether that's useful. But it depends who you are.
Thanks.
Have you looked at farm works for helicopters?
No, I was going to do shipping.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we live in Yarraville, so we've got the big ships and past. Again, it'd be a similar thing, like what is that ship, where is it going?
I get the impression a lot of ships turn off so they're in corporate.
Yeah, so again, same with the aircraft. So they'll only switch on a lot of the stuff when they're moving the runway, basically. Otherwise, they kind of interfere with, like this, the TCAS systems would trigger all the time those taxing around. Maybe it's another thing, so it's congested in somebody else's environment. Whereas a seed might be more certain.
Does that ASB exchange also have TDOA measurements for mode seeds or just ASB on mode S?
It's just this stuff. So that that's literally from there. So whatever's in there, that's it. So they do. You don't get the raw feed. You get kind of the data form.
Sure. Well, I think the flight radar doing reliable to calculate mode C aircraft that aren't forecasting ASB.
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know. Certainly not in Australia. These guys were the free option. Some of the guys charge because it's a commercial thing, so they have access to some of that data, unless you feed into it, and they give you a big breakthrough. Yeah, but they do enrich it with a lot of other data, such as the flight plans and so on. So, yeah, you'd still have, I think, some of this number of the.
Gives you a picture of flight radar, then your picture of the airplane lasts the whole picture that somebody's got there.
Yeah, and this certainly has the trails of the last 30 or 60 seconds. That just becomes a data format. The ADSB signal doesn't have it, it just has the different amount.
That's the radius message.
Yeah, so it's all kind of enriched and so on. It's like doing this kind of stuff, it's easier to work with data they have. So, and working with ground-based stuff, which for me I find, particularly section of data quality. You might pick up one of the frames, but not the other one, so problems in how.
Thank you very much.
There's no more live streaming talking. You're going to use this one?
Actually, it's done.
You can use my one if you want, or are you happy with your one?
No, we can plug in, it's fine. It's the,
I'll give you the Google Hangouts here. I'll show you now.
I could also put this on USB.
Yeah, that might be easier, and then you don't have to worry about Hangouts because it's already set up.
Do you have a stick or?